This book, more than other books, I kind of realized towards the end of doing it, is really a book about Canadian imperialism. And I'm comfortable saying that more directly than in previous books because in the book, I detail and I uncovered Canada's role at all levels of the imperial colonial project in Africa. At the level of Canadians involved in militarily conquering, the level of Canadians involved in political administration of British colonies, the level of economics, and at the level of ideological, cultural penetration or undermining of African societies through missionaries. In 1885, 385 Canadians left to help the British maintain control of Khartoum, which was under threat by indigenous forces, headed up by Charles Gordon, Khartoum at the time. Thousands of Canadians fought in the Boer War, which strengthened British imperialism in South Africa and Southern Africa. And there were thousands of Boers who were killed, and also thousands of Africans that were killed, or black Africans that were killed at the time. There were dozens, probably hundreds of Canadians who fought primarily with the British in conquering all different parts of the continent, from Kenya to Ghana to Nigeria. There were Canadians that fought in different generally British units. Most of these Canadian officers were trained at the Royal Military College in Kingston, Ontario, which was set up in 1876, largely to train Canadians to fight on behalf of British imperialism. One of the preeminent Canadians involved in conquering different parts of the continent was a man by the name of William Heinecker, trained at the Royal Military College from Sherbrooke, Quebec. Heinecker, between 1897 and 1906, participated in 12 different expeditions to conquer different parts of primarily current-day Nigeria. He became a full general within the British military. He was part of the West African Frontier Force, which was the preeminent British military force in West Africa. In his book and books about him, he refers to burning towns, scorched earth policies they employed. And in a 1906 book he published called Bush Warfare, which became a training manual for British military officers about to be dispatched to Africa, William Heinecker explained, quote, "The great thing is to impress savages with the fact that they are the weaker, and enforce the will of the white man, and accomplish the object for which the expedition is organized. No leniency or half measures are of any use until the savage has felt the power of force. Leniency is treated as a sign of weakness." So that's an indication of the sort of brutality of the racism that Canadian military officer in Africa held and expressed and tried to promote. Another of the prominent Canadian military or Royal Military College trained individuals who conquered different parts of the continent was a man by the name of William Stairs from a prominent family in Halifax. Stairs was part of two important expeditions on the continent. The first group of Europeans that would cross the continent through the center of Africa through current-day Congo. That took almost 3 years, the Emin Pasha Relief Expedition in 1887. He was then, after that mission, he led a force that rose to almost 2,000 men that helped conquer the east of the Congo on behalf of King Leopold II, the Belgian king, and actually added 150,000 square kilometers to the King Leopold's so-called Congo Free State. Some of you have probably read Adam Hochschild's book, King Leopold's Ghosts, about the system of brutal rubber extraction that King Leopold implemented that led to literally millions of people in the Congo dying or being killed. And so William Stairs added to Leopold's territory. And Stairs wrote a diary, which has been published, a couple different biographies from his diary. And he, in his own words, talks about ransacking the place, about taking slaves. And in one passage in his diary, Stairs explains, quote, "It was most interesting lying in the bush and watching the natives quietly at their day's work. Some women were pounding the bark of trees preparatory to making the coarse native cloth used all along this part of the river. Others were making banana flour by pounding up dried bananas. Men we could see building huts and engaged in other such work, boys and girls running about, singing, crying, others playing on a small instrument common all over Africa, a series of wooden strips bent over a bridge and twanged with the thumb and forefinger. All was as it was every day until our discharge of bullets, when the usual uproar of screaming of women took place." This is his own words. This is something he asked to have published upon his death, so he wasn't particularly embarrassed about it. And it obviously represents incredible inhumanity. Stairs, upon his return from this expedition, was feted in Halifax by the mayor. Lieutenant Governor General of Nova Scotia was on hand. They played "Here Comes the Conquering Hero." Today, there are 2 plaques named after Stairs, the Royal Military College in Kingston, another one at a cathedral in Kingston, and there's an island in Parry Sound, Ontario, named after him. So he is still held up as a great Canadian, despite, again, this is his own words. On addition to his diary is his role in conquering a big chunk of the continent for European colonialism. There were Canadians that governed British colonies: Ghana, northern Nigeria, Kenya. One, Percy Gerard, trained at the Royal Military College, governed both northern Nigeria and Ghana. There were hundreds of Canadians that had lower positions within colonial administration across the continent. And in 1923, there was something called the Dominion Selection Scheme that was begun from the Colonial Office in London with Ottawa's okay, and it was training or was recruiting recent graduates of Canadian universities, McGill, University of Toronto, Queen's, to join the British colonial administration, primarily in Africa. And the Dominion Selection Scheme, the lead official at the Colonial Office in London, when establishing the Dominion Selection Scheme, he described it as, quote, "taking Canada into partnership in the white man's burden." There were thousands, towards 2,500 Canadian missionaries proselytizing across the continent at the end of the colonial period. The first one began in 1860. The largest interdenominational Protestant mission in Africa at the end of the colonial period had been established in Toronto in 1893, the Sudan Interior Mission. Sudan at that time referred to all of northern sub-Saharan Africa. And there was about 1,300 missionaries working with the Sudan Interior Mission at the end of the colonial period. Not all Canadians, but it was still based in Toronto. And Canadian missionaries very much undermined African cultural ways, familial customs, economic systems. That was what the civilizing mission was really all about. And to do so, to gain the means to do so, they were largely dependent on funders in Canada. And to prod people to donate money, they had to describe African ways very negatively. So even when missionaries were dependent on African communities for their sustenance initially, and they were very much treated well by African societies, they needed to describe things very negatively to Canadians. And so they would refer to the darkness, the heathenism, the nakedness they said they saw on the continent. And to get a sense of just how extreme some of this sort of denigration of African society was by the missionaries, one example of one of the preeminent ideologues of the Sudan Interior Mission, a man by the name of Douglas C. Percy, published a number of novels attacking Nigerian ways, number of pamphlets, number of nonfiction books. In one of his nonfiction books in 1948, he explained, quote, "The people of Africa have associations with demonic powers. Behind the face of Africa looms a dark, evil intelligence, the shadow of Satan, the great enemy of God and man." So this is some of the sort of anti-African sentiment that is being pumped into Canadian society by the missionaries, which was very much part of a process of encouraging imperialist sentiment within Canada. So within Canada, they were very much encouraging imperialist sentiment. On the ground, they were undermining African cultural, familial, economic ways. And they were doing so often in close alignment with colonial authorities. In the book, I describe a couple of examples of Canadian missionaries working with Canadian colonial administrators, particularly in Uganda, to undermine African ways. And to get a sense of how far some of the Canadian missionaries went in supporting the colonial conquering process, a Canadian Jesuit who headed up a small mission station in southern Africa, in 1890, Alphonse Daigneault was his name, provided health services to forces organized by Cecil Rhodes, the famous British imperialist, that were about to conquer part of current-day Zimbabwe. And the Canadian Jesuit provided health services, nurses, to Cecil Rhodes' forces in exchange for a large plot of land in current-day Harare, the capital of Zimbabwe. So they did so in part in exchange for land, and in part because the Ndebele people, which I mispronounce again, had resisted their missionary incursions. So they were willing to conquer, they were willing to support conquering of the people because, in their bid to spread the word of God.